Getting ready to call the committee back to order. We see Judge Alito, and there's Mrs. Alito back in the hearing room at the Hart Senate office building. So let's watch and listen as we get back underway here.
Very final. Yes.
We will proceed now to the last three senators who have not had second round of 20 minutes. Senator Durbin, Senator Brownback, and Senator Coburn. As I mentioned before, I've had requests from two senators for a third round. Senator Leahy advises that there are others, and I'd like the specification. Senator Biden is prepared to proceed, has requested 20 minutes, and is prepared to proceed. Senator Feinstein has requested 10 minutes, and she has a doctor's appointment, so she won't be able to be here this evening, and we will accommodate her on that. But I would like to know who else wants time so we can plan what we're going to do for the balance of the evening and hereafter. I've had requests on my side of the aisle as to whether we're having a Friday session, and I've had a request as to whether we're having a Saturday session. And I told both of those requestors to stand by. And I do piecework, so I'm here for the duration. Senator Leahy?
Mr. Chairman, I've been told that each one of the people on this side want another round. I know I want to look at the transcript this evening, and I will have a few more questions. Obviously, you can do what you want. I mean, Judge Alito has shown he has the stamina of Hercules. I'm not sure that all the rest of us do. Senator Coates is hanging in there, but he's able to bail out now and then. I would suggest you finish with the senators who are here tonight. That would get us out of here around 7 or a little later. Come back in the morning. This is very similar to what we did with Chief Justice Roberts. Come back in the morning, and I have a feeling that whatever rounds it takes, we'd probably wrap it up in relatively expeditious order, but then we wouldn't be looking like we're trying to ram this through. It is a lifetime appointment after all. We get it done. I think most of the outside witnesses have been told that they were going to testify on Friday anyway, in all likelihood. And that's what I suggest.
Well, that's not true. There are people who can't be here on Friday among the outside witnesses who are looking at Thursday.
Well, they may, if we, who knows, we'd probably be wrapped up in time that we get them in here sometime Thursday.
Well, Senator Leahy,
it's up to you.
The only way we'll know what's going to happen, I want to know who wants more time so I can see what's going to go on tomorrow if we're going to go beyond Senator Feinstein tomorrow. We had this exact same situation with Chief Justice Roberts, and we worked on into Wednesday evening, and then we got an understanding as to what we're going to do on Thursday.
Well, we're into Wednesday evening now, already. So I mean, we've done.
Well, why don't we proceed with our three witnesses so as not to spend any more time?
Sure.
And if I could have the advice from you,
sure,
Senator Leahy, and from Senator Kennedy, who are here. Senator Durbin has 20 minutes. He probably has more time than he needs.
I've yet to find a situation in this committee, Mr. Chairman. You and I haven't been able to work things out because you've always been eminently fair.
Okay, well, to put all the cards up on the table, the only compelling force, if there is such thing as a compelling force with senators, is to figure out how to avoid working this evening by telling me what you want to do tomorrow. That's a fairly simple formula.
Who was a leader, Mr. Chairman, who once said moving the Senate around is like transporting bullfrogs in a wheelbarrow? But you see,
Senator Baker, who is the author of The Herding Cats. Senator Durbin, you're recognized for 20 minutes to be on with it.
Thank you very much. And Judge Alito, if I'm not mistaken, this is how we started the day. I think we're now into about our 8.5 hours, which means we're both on overtime by any measurable standard of workplace in America. Thank you for your endurance, and to your family as well. I know it's a stressful and tough situation. Let me say at the outset, I asked you a question earlier today about settled law and John Roberts' statement before the committee. I've spoken to one of your cornermen over here, Ed Gillespie, who he and I have a difference of opinion about what it says in the record. I commend to my colleagues the record itself, September 13th, 2005, page 145, and I stand by my earlier statement. Enough said about that. I want to ask you about two substantive issues. We're not going to go to Princeton or any other place. Unitary executive. The reason it's important is that there are some people, even on the Supreme Court, who believe the unitary executive theory, I don't know if it's always associated with the Federalist Society, but sometimes associated with the Federalist Society and their members. But the unitary executive theory gives a president extraordinary power. And under that scope of power theory, some argue that a president, particularly in wartime situation, can ignore and violate laws as commander-in-chief. Critically important and timely as we debate eavesdropping and the like. You have made it clear that when you spoke to the Federalist Society in 2000, you were not talking about scope, but you were talking instead as to whether or not he would have control over the executive branch. I hope I'm characterizing your statement correctly.
That's exactly correct. And I think in the speech I said there is a debate about the scope of what is meant by the executive power, but there isn't any debate that the president has the power to take care that the laws are faithfully executed. And that was the scope of the power that I was discussing.
So my question to you is this. What about those who do argue the unitary executive scope theory? Do you agree with their analysis? Do you disagree? Would you be joining Justices Scalia and Thomas, Justice Thomas in particular, in his dissent in Hamdi, in arguing that in this situation a president has more power than the law expressly gives him?
I don't think that the unitary executive has anything to do with that. Let me just say that at the outset. I think that, and if other people use that term to mean the scope of executive power, that certainly isn't the way that I understand.
That's not your point of view.
That is not
you
my
don't
point of
accept
view.
that point of view.
No,
and if an argument is made that that's how they're going to expand the power of the president, as you testify today, that is not your position or your feeling. I would say it in your own words.
It is not the unitary, when I talk about the unitary executive, I'm talking about the president's control over the executive branch, no matter how big or how small, no matter how much power it has or how little power it has. To me, the issue of the scope of executive power is an entirely different question, and it goes to what can you read into simply the term. That's part of it, and of course there are some other powers that are given to the president in Article 2, commander-in-chief power, for example, and there can be a debate, of course, about the scope of that power, but that doesn't have to do with the unitary executive.
So when Hamdi draws that line, and Justice O'Connor makes that statement about no blank check for a president in times of war when it comes to the rights of American citizens, and there's a dissent from Justice Thomas who argues unitary executive, scope of powers, more power to the president, you're coming down on the majority side and not on the Thomas side of that argument. Is that fair to say?
Well, I'm not coming down. I don't recall that Justice Thomas uses the term unitary executive in his dissent. It doesn't stick out in my mind that he did. If he did, he's using it there in a sense that's different from the sense in which I was using the term.
Fair enough. Let me move to another area. I hate to return to that infamous 1985 memo, but there's one element of it we've really not asked you about, and that is your reference to the Establishment Clause. So instead of going into that memo, let me just try to explore with you for a moment your feelings about religion. You've heard some questions, religion in our diverse society and under the Constitution. You've heard some questions from the other side about it, from Senator Brownback, Senator Cornyn, and others. And I would like to try to get into this a little bit. There seems to be a debate within the court between two standards for judging conduct as to whether it's constitutional in relation to freedom of exercise of religion as well as establishment. And the two theories, if I can describe them quickly, are the Lemon theory, which has 3 tests that the Berger Court came out with in 1971, and the new coercion theory. Are you familiar with both of those theories?
I am, and there's actually a third theory, the endorsement test.
Where do you come down? Do you subscribe to any one of those as an accurate analysis of what the Founding Fathers meant under the Establishment Clause?
I don't think the court has settled on any single theory that it applies in every case. There are cases in which it finds the Lemon theory, the Lemon test, which now has two parts, whether the statute has, whether whatever is at issue has a secular purpose, and whether the primary effect is to advance or inhibit religion. There are instances in which it applies that. It tends to apply that in cases involving funding. There's the endorsement test, and it applies that in certain cases. Typically, it applies those in cases involving things like the displaying of symbols that may have religious significance. So it itself has not found a single test that it applies in all of these cases.
Well, where are you? If the court is divided, and it appears it is, where do you come down? I mean, please tell me.
Well, I do not myself have a grand unified theory of the Establishment Clause. As a lower court judge, of course, my job has been to apply those precedents. And this is an area in which I think the court has been, you can just see by the number of cases that it has decided, it has been attempting to find the best way of expressing its view of what the Establishment Clause requires. I certainly agree that it embodies a very important principle, and one that has been instrumental in allowing us to live together successfully as probably the most religiously diverse country in the world, and maybe in the history of the world, and it's a very important principle. But I myself do not have a grand unified theory of this.
Let me ask you a few starting points. The question was asked of John Roberts about his personal religious and moral belief. And I would ask you in the most open-ended fashion, we all come to our roles in life with life experience and with values. When you are calculating and making a decision, if you are on the Supreme Court, tell me what your personal religious or moral beliefs, what role that will play in that decision process.
Well, my personal religious beliefs and are important to me in my private life. They are an important part of the way I was raised, and they've been important to Martha and me in raising our children. But my obligation as a judge is to interpret and apply the Constitution and the laws of the United States, and not my personal religious beliefs or any personal moral beliefs that I have. And there's nothing about my religious beliefs that interferes with my doing that. I have a particular role to play as a judge, and that does not involve imposing any religious views that I have or moral views that I have on the rest of the country.
That is virtually the same answer given by Justice Roberts, and I think, from my point of view, that is the right answer. It's the same challenge many of us face on this side of the table with decisions that we face. Now, I asked Judge Roberts the following. Does the Free Exercise Clause, in addition to Establishment Clause, does it protect the right of a person to be respected in America if they have no religious beliefs, the non-believers?
Yes, it does. It is freedom to worship or not worship as you choose, and compelling somebody to worship would be a clear violation of the religion clauses of the First Amendment.
Let me go to a specific case. I'm trying to look. Here it is. Black Horse Pike Board of Education case, which you were involved in, and it's an interesting case. And I hope this fact pattern that I described to you is correct. The school board policy allowed the seniors at this school to vote on having a graduation prayer. And the decision whether was suggested, whether that was coercing students who didn't agree with that religious prayer or had no religious belief. What is your feeling, or what was your feeling at that time when it came to that decision?
Well, that was the case that followed Lee versus Weissman and preceded the Santa Fe case, which dealt with a prayer before a football game. Lee versus Weissman involved a situation in which the principal And that was it's the most directly relevant and a rather recent precedent at the time of the Black Horse Pike case. In Lee versus Weissman, the principal of a middle school, as I recall, decided that there would be an invocation at the middle school graduation and selected a member of the clergy, a local rabbi, to deliver the prayer and specified the nature of the prayer that would be appropriate for the circumstances. And the Supreme Court held that that was a violation of the Establishment Clause. The case that we considered in the Black Horse Pike case involved a situation in which the high school left it up to the students through an election to decide whether there would be a prayer at the high school graduation, and left it up to them to select the person who would conduct the prayer, the student who would lead them in the prayer if they decided by a vote to do that. And so our job at that point was to decide whether this fell on one side or the other of a line that I referred to earlier, which Justice O'Connor very helpfully, the distinction that she drew between government religious speech, which is not allowed, and private religious speech, which is protected. The government itself cannot speak on religious matters, but the government also can't discriminate against private religious speech. And we had here a situation...
That goes back to the Olivia case, where the student comes up with the drawing of Jesus, and that is a voluntary, personal, and private expression, as you have described.
That's correct. And the Supreme Court has recognized this in a number of cases. In the Rosenberger case and the Good News Club case and the Lamb's Chapel case, they've drawn this distinction. So here we had a situation involving an election by the students to pick somebody to lead them in prayer, and which side of the line did it fall on? Well, it wasn't individual student speech, but it was collective student speech by way of an election. And that was what we had to decide, which side of this line it fell on. And Judge Mansman, who wrote the opinion that I joined in that case, explained why we thought it fell on the side of the line of individual student speech.
Let me ask you about that. Let me explore it for a second. You're dealing with a school board policy. A school board is a government agency. They've set up the policy, so it's not coming entirely from a voluntary, personal situation, like the Olivia case. And you know that the majority is going to rule in the decision on whether there will be a prayer and what the substance of the prayer will be. How then could you respect the rights of the minority, including people with different religious beliefs and non-believers, if you leave it up to a majority vote?
Well, that's why, that factor is why it was a case that didn't, there could be a debate about which side of this line it fell on. Now, I think there also was a disclaimer that was distributed at the time of the graduation explaining to anybody who was in attendance that the prayer was not endorsed. If there was a prayer, it wasn't endorsed by the school board, and that this was a decision of the students. There are factors there that fall on one side of the line. There are factors there that point to the case being put on one side of that line, factors that point to putting the case on the other side of the line. And Judge Mansman's opinion explained why she thought, and I agree, that it would fall on the private student speech side of the line. But it was a question that was debatable. And then the Santa Fe case came along later. It didn't involve exactly the same situation, but it involved a related situation, and that is now the Supreme Court's expression of its opinion in the form of a precedent on the application the application of this test that I've been talking about to a situation like this.
Let me ask you, as you've described it, this is not an easy call. I mean, there are circumstances on both sides, and yet in your dissent you use the phrase, referring to the majority, as hostility toward religion. It seems to me that you could make a case that I'm not hostile toward religion, but trying to be sensitive to the rights of all to believe or not to believe in America, and come down on the opposite side of the case. Were you overstating your position in using that phrase, hostility toward religion, in describing the majority?
It was Judge Mansman's opinion, which I joined, and I don't remember the phrase hostility to religion. Obviously, it must be in there. I certainly don't think that she meant to suggest that those who were objecting to this were proceeding in bad faith, or even that they were hostile to religion. I think what she, I can't speak for her, and I don't recall the specific language, but looking at it now, the way I would put it was that she probably thought that this was not giving as much room for private religious speech as should be given.
Interesting that I couldn't tell you what in the heck I ever wrote in law school about anything, but in the second year in law school, you wrote a paper, I take it, some research paper, which you had to tell us about here, relative to the issue of religion, and then in the 85 memo, raised the question about the Warren Court on the Establishment Clause. What was it that the Warren Court decided on the Establishment Clause that troubled you, if you remember?
Well, I actually think that the student note from the Yale Law School, or the Yale Law Journal, is an illustration of the sort of thing that has interested me and troubled me about the jurisprudence in this area for a long time. In the law school note, I talked about what are called the release time cases. It was the McCollum case and Zork versus Clausen, both of which were decided just before Chief Justice Warren took his seat. And they involved situations that were quite similar. There was a distinction between the two programs, but they were quite similar, and the court reached contrary conclusions. And unfortunately, this has been a recurring pattern in the Establishment Clause jurisprudence, cases that turn on extremely fine distinctions. The Supreme Court held in Board of Education versus Allen, if I'm remembering the correct case at the end of the Warren Court, that it was permissible for a school board to supply secular books to schools that are related to that are religiously oriented. And then later in another case, I think it was Woolman, they said, but you can't, but that doesn't apply to other instructional material, other secular instructional material. And this has been the thing about the Establishment Clause that has bothered me, the absence of just what your initial question was pointing to, some sort of theory that draws distinctions that don't turn on these very fine lines.
Tell me about the Establishment Clause in a more contemporary context, if you can. You talked about the case in the Warren Court and providing secular books to religious schools, which I find no problem with. I think that's acceptable from my point of view, whatever that's worth. But what about the concept and theory of financial support from a government agency to a school that is a religious school, where the money is used for the purpose of teaching religion or proselytizing?
Well, I think the court's precedents have been very clear on that the money, a government body cannot supply money to a school for the purpose of conducting religious education. And I don't recall a suggestion in dissenting opinions, maybe there's one that I'm not recalling here, that says that would be permissible.
I guess that I'm running out of time, but it would go back to my first question. I think under the coercion test, there's some argument among some on the court and others that not applying Lemon, but using this new coercion test may give them more leeway when it comes to this kind of financial support and vouchers. But I don't want to presume that, and I thank you for your responses to these questions. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Durbin. Senator Brownback.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We started off this morning and we'll end today. I want to thank you for all the questions you've answered. You've answered the questions that I have had, and I've heard much of the rest of the discussion. I think we've covered many of these points so multiple times. We've just overdone it on some of these. So, Mr. Chairman, I'm satisfied with the questions that he's answered. I will be supporting your nomination in front of the committee and on the floor. I think you're an outstanding nominee, and I've appreciated your thoughts that you've put forward here. I think if approved, and I hope you are, and I think you will be approved by the full Senate, you're going to serve as an outstanding justice on the United States Supreme Court. And I will be supporting you here in the committee and on the floor. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd yield back my time.
Senator Brownback, thank you. Thank you for 19 minutes and 6 seconds. Senator Coburn.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I'll give you some time back, but it won't be quite that much. Thank you. I have a couple of charts I want to show just to clarify the record. I want to again make sure everybody knows that in 1985 there's a quote in the Princeton packet that the campaign to eliminate the Army ROTC program and what was perceived as a decline of Princeton athletics. It was also known that this CAP program was soliciting through mail membership and support. There also was a disclaimer in this that I want to make sure is in the record as well. And it says the appearance of an article in Prospect does not necessarily represent an endorsement of the author's belief by the Concerned Alumni of Princeton. CAP has never taken a formal stand on coeducation at Princeton or elsewhere. Thank you. And I liken that to, I'm a member of the American Medical Association, but I will tell you, I don't agree with everything that's written in JAMA. Matter of fact, I take great umbrage at some of the things that are written there and some of the ideas that are put forward that aren't done well, that go counter to good medicine. But that doesn't mean I endorse, because I'm a member of the American Medical Association, because I'm a member of JAMA, doesn't mean that I endorse everything that organization or that magazine might put out. And so I think Senator Graham had it right, this idea of association with anything means that you take it all, whether in fact that's the truth or not, and that's not good work on this committee, and it's not truthful, and it's not intellectually honest. I want to spend just a few minutes going back. You had mentioned earlier about one of the things the court didn't do is they can't take necessarily all the technology or all the science and how it applies to things, and that things in fact might change. And I mentioned earlier this morning in our questions about the Sternberg case and the Dobie Bolton and this concept of health. And one of the things is a practicing physician who's delivered 4,000 babies, who also had a grandmother who came into this world as a result of rape. So I have a special view on the consequences of rape.
Try to get as much as I can tonight.
This concept of health, I'm interested in your thought on it, because one of the things I think about it is the health of the woman when? At the time or later? Because of what we do know about the consequences of Roe v. Wade and the actual act of abortion and the impact that has on a woman's health. For example, you're twice as likely to commit suicide if you've had an abortion. Now studied, longitudinal study shows that. Twice as likely to have alcohol or drug dependency if you've had an abortion. About 60% more likely to have a preterm delivery. So as the court looks at that and also looks at the fact, this health question, then also looks at health and then also looks at viability. When I was in medical school, it was unusual for a preterm infant at 28, 29, 30 weeks to survive. And we routinely see infants at 24 weeks that survive. I have a nephew, 24, 25-week delivery. The only deficit he has is he's blind in one eye. He weighed 1 pound 2 ounces when he was born. And so technology means something. And so the fact that we're not going to commit to give a blanket answer, and I'm convinced that the only way you'll get certain votes off this committee and out of this Senate is if you were to write a blood oath that there's nothing that could interrupt any type of abortion on demand at any time. So my question to you is, how is it that the court should, any court should, take into consideration these questions about technology and science and how they impact the law? And the other thing I'd add to that, and I mentioned in my opening statement, is we consider somebody alive when they have heartbeat and brainwave. And we consider them dead when they don't have those things. And how is it that the court can't look at that science and say, We have a heartbeat and a brainwave. We know when viability is now outside of the womb. Should those factors play in the decision of the court? Or should we just blanket stare decisis and say, Rode and Casey, it's all settled, we're not going to look at the science? Should that play a role?
Well, Senator, I guess I would answer that by saying that you would look at the factors that are relevant under the stare decisis analysis and ask the role of the sort of data that you have outlined, ask how that would be involved in the factors that go into the stare decisis analysis. And then if you get past that to the second step, of course, you would ask the same question, whether what bearing that information has on the resolution of the question at that step. Just speaking in general, not talking about abortion at all. In general, in deciding any legal issue, I think courts should be receptive to any information that has a bearing on the decisions that they are making. There's no such thing in general as bad knowledge, and I think that is relevant to the decision-making process that judges go through. They should be receptive to information that is relevant, that the parties want to bring to their attention, and then decide how it figures in the application of the legal standards that they're applying in the particular case.
Let me ask you another question, and I want you to be careful how you answer this, because I think at some time this probably will become before you, and I'm not trying to get you to pin down or if I'm driving a car today and I hit a pregnant woman who has a 36, 37-week fetus, and the woman survives and the fetus dies, I can be held accountable for the death of that fetus. And by law, we value that as a life. Unborn, but a life. If I say, I'm the pregnant woman, I want to terminate that fetus at 37 weeks, there's nothing in this country today that keeps me from doing that, even though on one side of the law we say it's a life. How did we get there to where it's not a life or it is a life? Tell me, somebody logically explain that to the American people, that how if I kill it, it was a life, but if I choose to take it voluntarily, it's not a life. Can anybody logically explain how we got there and what the consequences going down the road are going to be for us as a nation when we have laws that send two completely different signals about the same individual?
Well, let me try to just explain my understanding of where the law rests on those two questions. The first is a question of tort law, or maybe it's a question of, well, it's a question of tort law, and decisions are made by state legislatures. Maybe in some instances it comes about through the development of common law through the state courts regarding the scope of state tort law, and protection. A tort can be created that applies in the situation of the auto accident you mentioned, or a legislature may choose to structure the tort law differently. But that's been a decision that's been left for the state legislatures to decide, and they've taken a variety of approaches in doing that, I believe. The second, of course, is the issue of Roe and the cases that follow after it, and those are based on an interpretation of the Fifth Amendment and the 14th Amendment of the Constitution, and they're not the result of decisions, of legislative decisions made at the state level or at the federal level.
Can you rationalize any way of a logical explanation of how that could be, though? I mean, if you had somebody that wasn't from this world and they came in and they said, oh yeah, if you kill it, it was alive, but if you choose to kill it, if you accidentally kill it, it was alive, if you choose to kill it, it wasn't. Can you come to, I mean, I'm having trouble getting my mind around that concept that there's any logic there. I just wondered if you were.
Well, the answer is that the tort situation has been left for its development under state law, and states have taken a variety of approaches expressing the values that the legislature believes should be embodied in the tort law. And in the abortion context, of course, states have laws regulating abortion, and they're free to enact whatever statutes they want on this subject as long as they comply with the Constitution. But we have decisions of the Supreme Court that establish constitutional requirements in the area. I think that's the explanation. The decisions are made by different bodies.
One other comment, for the American public to know, there's 1 million abortions in the U.S. each year. This is from the Alan Gudemacher Institute, and it's very interesting for us to know the purpose that why people have an abortion, why women choose to terminate their unborn children. 21% say they can't afford a baby. 21% that say they don't want the responsibility. 16% say the baby could change their lives. 12% have problems with relationship or want to avoid single parenthood. 11% are not mature enough or don't want to have more children. 3% have a possible fetal health program, of which 2/3 are Down syndrome or spina bifida. 1% resulted from rape or incest. 1% the husband or the partner didn't want them to have a baby. And 1% is they didn't want anybody else to know somebody had sex with them. And of that, 48% of the women who have an abortion in this country have already had one previously. So in fact, our country, through the auspices of an activist court, in my opinion, has moved to use abortion not as a health issue, but as a convenience issue. And we've done great damage because we have a schizophrenic policy. And my hope, Judge, is that science and technology and recognition of life on some parameter ought to be applied. And my hope is, as they get to the court, is that we have common sense. And it doesn't have to be my way. It can be Senator Schumer's or Senator Durbin's view. The fact is there's a legitimate disagreement about rape and incest and medical malformations and all these other things. But we need in this country to have the confidence in the Supreme Court restored. And I think it's taken a hit just like this institution has taken a hit because it's making decisions that aren't based on fact and good law. It's making decisions like we have made decisions based on expediency. And my hope is that you'll be confirmed. I think you have great character and great integrity, and integrity I think is the #1 issue, and not your legal mind, your heart and your soul, and how you view honesty and straightforwardness. And that the result will be that we'll see some leadership that will put science and fact and combine it with the law and restore the confidence in the Supreme Court in this country. I asked Judge Roberts, why do you think we've lost it, some of the confidence of the court? And he said, because we've gotten into areas of policy and not law. And I tend to agree with him, and it's my hope that you would agree with that as well. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you very much, Senator Coburn. We're trying to figure out what the schedule is going to be for the balance of the evening and for the balance of the week. We now have Senator Biden, who's requested 20 minutes, and Senator Feinstein 10, and Senator Durbin 10, all of which will be done tomorrow. Anybody who wants a fourth round, I want to do the third rounds tonight so that we can move ahead promptly tomorrow.
Mr. Chairman, I think that, if we want to do this, the judge and his family have been sitting here all day. He's been answering questions. He's shown more equanimity than most of us would. You sat here through the whole thing. I've sat here through most of it. But senators can come and go. He can't. He's had to sit through all of it. His family's had to sit through all of it, and that has to be a strain. I don't remember most teenage sons that would be show that much attention on these things. But I would suggest that we are probably going to have far better questions. If we can go back and go over, I know what I want to do. I want to go over some of the, I'm not going to have an awful lot of questions, but I'd like to go back. There's 3 or 4 places from my notes that I have some questions, but I want to read the transcript. So when I asked the question, in fairness to the judge, I'm going specifically to the transcript. So I think, this is the same thing we did with Chief Justice Roberts. We came back on that last day, as I recall, and I think we wrapped up around 1:30 in the afternoon.
And we wrapped up about 11 o'clock, a little before.
Did we?
A little before 11. Let me ask
You're
you
having
this.
so much fun, it just seems time goes by so quickly.
We do not have word from Senator Cole or Senator Feingold. Suppose we put the maximum of 25 minutes on the next round for tomorrow, and suppose we start at 9 o'clock. That means the only people that have to be here are Senator Leahy and myself at 9.
Well, I will be here at 9. I'm here usually a lot earlier than
Senator
that.
Schumer just on the auctioneer said yes.
No, that's okay. I'll go along with it and understand, though, and I would assume, you've always been fair, if we run into some extraordinary problem, somebody may need a few more minutes, but
Anybody who satisfies your extraordinary problem test will get more time.
okay.
Make
I'll
it
go.
your test.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Without objection, so ordered. Judge Alito, you've shown remarkable stamina, and you've shown, in my opinion, remarkable patience. I think it's unwise for any senator, including the chairman, to do too much commenting about anybody else's questioning. But you have been patient, and people may not like your answers, but they are your answers. We have precedent for that. Nobody's even said they're misleading. They said they just don't like them. But you have been consistent and very patient in stating your position, even though you've been called upon to state it repetitively and repetitively and repetitively. So I think it is well within the ambit of fairness to say that you have been patient and you've shown real stamina, as has Mrs. Alito and has your loyal family. So that we will proceed at 9 o'clock tomorrow, and we will have 20 minutes for Senator Biden, 10 minutes for Senator Feinstein, 10 minutes for Senator Durbin, and my expectation is we will not have a great deal of time for Senator Cole. I'm not sure about Senator Feingold, and that anybody else will be limited to 25 minutes on the final round, subject to the Leahy exceptional circumstance standard. Recess.
Okay.